The alien princess feared her human husband until she uncovered his true nobility. HFY story on a planet far from Earth, in a galaxy teeming with alien life, a young princess named Scifi stood by the massive windows of her royal chambers. Her eyes gazed out across the vast expanse of the world below, its city shimmering under the twin suns. Scifi was the daughter of Zarka, an empire known for its strength, wisdom, and fearsome warriors. Her people were respected throughout the stars, and her name was spoken with reverence. Yet Scifi's thoughts were not on her people, nor on her responsibilities as the future ruler. Instead, they were with the man she had been forced to marry, Jackson Cole. Jackson was human, a strange, rugged man from a planet called Earth, a planet her people had never fully understood. He was not of noble blood. In fact, he was far from it. He was a cowboy, a farmer, a man who had lived a hard life in a world that had once been wild and untamed. Scifi had never wanted to marry him. The union was meant to strengthen the relationship between the humans and the Zarka Empire. But Scifi's mind was filled with doubts. Why would her father choose a man like him to be her husband? At first, Scifi had feared the idea of living with a man who was so unlike her people. Jackson's world was full of danger and violence, where men fought for their lives and the lives of their families. He had spent most of his life on the frontier, surrounded by harsh weather, dangerous creatures, and even more dangerous people. She had read stories of such places, but never believed that she would actually live among them. She had grown up in the safety and luxury of a palace, surrounded by servants, scholars, and warriors. But now, she was married to someone who had no title, no wealth, and no place among her kind. When Jackson first arrived on Zarka, he had been a stranger, a symbol of human strength that Scifi had been told to accept. She had been forced to meet him, to be polite, but there had always been a distance between them. He spoke little and seemed to carry an air of quiet strength that both intrigued and unnerved her. Scifi couldn't help but notice the way his eyes never met hers directly, the way he seemed uncomfortable in the royal court, with its grandeur and formality. It was as though he didn't belong in such a place. He didn't belong, and yet here he was. Scifi was the princess. She was meant to be a leader, a symbol of everything that made her people great. And yet, she felt a strange unease whenever Jackson was near. He had never tried to act like a noble, nor did he seem to want to impress anyone. He simply existed, carrying himself with a quiet dignity that Scifi couldn't quite place. She knew that he had been chosen because of his strength and resourcefulness, qualities that her father believed would be useful in securing the future of the Empire. But Scifi had heard rumors of the strange nature of humans. She had heard the stories, the ones that spoke of their unpredictable behavior, their sudden bursts of violence, and their ruthless determination when their survival was at stake. Could Jackson be like that? Despite her fears, Scifi had to admit that she had never seen him act in such a way. He was always calm, even in situations that would have sent others into panic, and when they had spoken, his words had always been measured, thoughtful. But still, there was something about him that made Scifi uncomfortable. Her father had told her that their marriage was essential for maintaining peace between their two peoples. The Zarka had been watching the humans from afar for years, and after many discussions it had been decided that Scifi would marry Jackson as a way to ensure their alliance. The two races were very different, but with Scifi and Jackson's marriage, both sides hoped to avoid war and strengthen their futures. The first few weeks of their marriage had been difficult for both of them. Scifi had spent most of her time in her chambers, away from Jackson. She did not know how to speak to him, and he did not know how to speak to her. At night she would hear the sound of him working in the palace garden, but she would not join him. She couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she stayed inside, staring out the window and thinking of her people, of the warriors who fought for honor and glory. She wondered if Jackson ever missed his home, his land, and his people. Jackson, on the other hand, had kept to himself. He did not try to push Scifi to spend time with him. He did not pressure her to be anything other than herself. He knew that their marriage was not one born of love, but of duty. He understood that. Still, he was a man of action, and he was determined to help in any way he could, even if it meant staying in the background, silently watching over her, ensuring her safety. It wasn't until one day while Scifi was walking through the royal gardens that things began to change. Scifi had been lost in thought, walking slowly along the path. She didn't see Jackson until he was right in front of her. He stood tall and broad-shouldered, his dusty cowboy hat tilted back, his worn leather jacket a stark contrast to the fine robes of the palace. His eyes met hers, and for the first time Scifi saw something different in him. It wasn't fear or unease, it was respect. I didn't mean to startle you, Jackson said in his deep, steady voice. Scifi blinked, caught off guard. It's all right, she replied softly, her gaze faltering. There was a long pause between them. Jackson seemed to hesitate before speaking again. I wanted to tell you something about Earth. Scifi tilted her head slightly, curious but still cautious. Earth? Jackson nodded. Back where I'm from, we've had our fair share of struggles. Wars, poverty, hardship. But it's also where we learn to fight for what's worth fighting for. And for people like me, we don't need titles or riches. We just need to know that we're doing right by those we care about. Seraph's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard a human speak like this before. His words were simple, but there was a depth to them that she hadn't expected. Was this what it meant to be human? Her thoughts were interrupted as Jackson continued. I'm not here to be a king. I'm here to stand beside you. And if there's ever a fight to be had, you won't have to face it alone. Scifi looked at him in silence, the weight of his words sinking in. She had feared him, feared his unknown nature, but in that moment she realized that he wasn't like the others. Perhaps he wasn't what she had expected, but maybe that was a good thing. As she looked into his eyes, she wondered if her fears had been misplaced. Could it be that her human husband was more than she had given him credit for? The days that followed Seraph's unexpected conversation with Jackson were filled with uncertainty, but also a strange sense of curiosity. The walls around her heart, which had been carefully built over the years to protect her from fear and distrust, began to show signs of weakness. Scifi was not used to feeling this way, especially towards someone who was not of her own kind. But Jackson, he was different. She wasn't sure how, but she knew something about him was different from the stories she had heard about humans. Scifi spent more time with him in the days that followed, although they still didn't speak much. She found herself watching him as he worked in the palace gardens, fixing the small structures with his hands, taking care of the plants and trees with a careful touch. He seemed so at ease in this foreign place, as though it were his own home. She marveled at how effortlessly he moved, his body accustomed to hard work and discipline. One morning, as the sun began to rise over the palace, Scifi stepped out onto the balcony, drawn by the sound of Jackson working. He was at the far side of the garden, his back to her as he carefully dug a trench for a new plant. His broad shoulders flexed with each movement, and Scifi felt an unfamiliar pull in her chest. It was not just his appearance, though. It was his presence. It felt steady, grounded, as if he could face anything without hesitation. She had to admit to herself that there was something noble about him, even though he lacked the titles and riches that her people valued. His strength wasn't born of an empire or ancient bloodline. It was born from the land, from survival, from the very core of who he was. As she walked closer, Jackson turned and saw her approaching. He wiped his brow, looking slightly surprised but pleased to see her. "Good morning, Your Highness," he said, his voice calm, but it held a note of warmth. Scifi nodded, though she did not speak right away. She studied him for a moment, watching the way his hands moved, the way he worked with the earth. For a long time she had been told that humans were unpredictable, dangerous. They were driven by their desires, by their emotions, but Jackson seemed different. He was patient, focused. It was as if he had found his purpose in the simple things that most people ignored. "Jackson," Scifi said softly, her voice carrying across the garden, "do you ever miss your home? The earth, I mean." Jackson paused for a moment, as if considering the question. He slowly straightened up, wiping the dirt from his hands onto his trousers before looking at her. "It's hard to miss something when you've learned to survive without it," he said quietly. "But Earth, it taught me things about what it means to fight, to protect what's important. It's where I learned that a man's worth isn't in what he has, but in what he does, and in the kind of person he is when no one is watching." Scifi felt a pang in her chest as she listened to him. His words struck a chord within her, a chord she hadn't known existed. In her world, nobility had always been about birthright, wealth, and power, but Jackson's words spoke of something deeper, something more meaningful. Perhaps she had been wrong about him. Perhaps she had been wrong about humans. Before she could say anything else, a loud rumble echoed across the valley, followed by the screech of a ship's engines. Both Scifi and Jackson turned towards the noise. The sound was growing closer. "Stay here," Jackson said immediately, his voice firm, though it carried a hint of concern. "I'll go check it out." Scifi nodded, her unease growing. She didn't need to be told twice. She had learned early on that Jackson was a man of action, always ready to protect those around him. Without another word, he turned and strode towards the entrance of the palace. Scifi remained in the garden, her heart pounding as she wondered what this new threat could be. She had been told that peace was fragile, especially in this corner of the galaxy. There were those who did not want the alliance between humans and Zarka to succeed. She had no doubt that those who wished to see her fail were always watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike. A few minutes later, Jackson returned, his expression serious but calm. "Pirates," he said simply. "They've landed nearby, but they're not here for us yet. They're likely after supplies. I've already set up a perimeter and sent word to the local guard. We'll be ready for them." Scifi felt a sense of relief flood through her. Jackson had already taken charge of the situation without hesitation. It was clear to her now that he was not just a simple cowboy. He was a leader in his own right, with a strength that went far beyond his physical abilities. And she found herself trusting him more and more. As they walked back towards the palace, Jackson kept his eyes peeled, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. His posture was tense, alert, and Scifi couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration for him. "What will we do?" she asked. "We'll wait," Jackson replied. "But I'll make sure you're safe. Nothing's going to happen to you, Princess." Scifi didn't doubt him. She had seen the way he moved, the way he fought. He was like a storm waiting to strike, controlled, powerful, and unstoppable. But there was something else in his eyes, something that told her he was more than just a soldier. He was a protector, someone who would do anything to keep her safe. Hours passed, and the pirates did indeed make their move. They came in a group of small ships, attempting to ambush the royal convoy and steal supplies from the nearby settlements, but they were no match for the combined forces of the Zarka and Jackson. He led a small group of guards, and with surprising ease, they took down the pirates with well-placed shots and strategic planning. Scifi watched from the safety of the palace courtyard as Jackson fought. She had never seen him in action before, and she was taken aback by the way he moved, so precise, so confident, and yet so controlled. He wasn't reckless like the warriors of her empire, but he didn't need to be. His calm determination made him even more dangerous. When the pirates were finally subdued, Jackson walked back to Scifi. His face was covered in sweat, and his clothes were slightly torn, but he looked unchanged, just as steady, just as calm as before. "Is it over?" Scifi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Jackson replied with a small grim smile. "But we'll always be ready. That's what matters." As Scifi looked at him, her heart swelled with respect. She had feared him before, feared his human nature, his potential for violence. But now she saw him for what he truly was. A protector, a warrior, and a man of unwavering honor. Scifi felt something shift inside her, a feeling she hadn't anticipated. She was no longer afraid of Jackson. In fact, she felt safe with him. For the first time since their marriage, she understood that his nobility wasn't something that could be measured by bloodlines or royal titles. It was something far deeper than that. Jackson was noble because of his actions, because of who he was, not what he had been born into. The days after the pirate attack were quiet. Scifi had returned to her royal duties, but there was a noticeable shift in how she viewed her husband. Jackson's calm and controlled nature had won her trust, but she still didn't know everything about him. There were still pieces of his past that he kept to himself, and that mystery lingered in the back of her mind. One evening, as the two of them walked through the garden, Scifi decided to ask him about his past. They had always talked about the present and the future, but she had never heard him speak about where he had come from, or what his life had been like before Zarka. "Jackson," Scifi said, her voice soft, "you've told me a lot about what you do now, but what about your past, before you came here, to our world?" Jackson stopped walking and looked up at the sky. The twin suns were setting, casting a warm glow across the land. He seemed to hesitate for a moment before turning his gaze back to her. "It's not an easy story to tell," Jackson replied, his voice quiet. "My past. It's not something I talk about much, but if you want to know, I'll tell you." Scifi nodded, her curiosity piqued. Jackson had always been open, but there had been something about his past that he had never shared. He had been a man of mystery, and now it seemed that mystery was about to be unraveled. Jackson motioned for her to sit on one of the benches in the garden. He took a seat beside her and began to speak, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I was born on Earth," he began, "on a land that wasn't always kind to its people. I grew up in a small town, far from the cities. It wasn't a life of luxury or ease. We had to work hard every day just to survive. My family, we didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough." Scifi listened intently, sensing the weight of his words. Jackson was not one to speak lightly, and the fact that he was sharing this with her meant something. She felt a connection to him that she hadn't fully understood before. As a kid, Jackson continued, I learned quickly that the world wasn't fair. There were always people who would take advantage of you, people who would hurt you if you let them. But my father, he taught me something that stuck with me all my life. He told me, it's about what you do when the world tries to break you. Jackson paused for a moment, his eyes looking off into the distance. Scifi could tell that his memories were difficult to relive. I worked on a farm most of my life. I learned how to fight, how to survive. But it wasn't until I was older that I realized what I was meant to do. There was a war. Many wars, actually. Earth was torn apart by conflict, and I joined the army, like many others.
But it wasn't just a fight.
I had something else in mind. Scifi leaned forward, intrigued.
Oh, was it?
Jackson looked at her, his gaze steady but filled with a deep sadness. I wanted to protect people. I saw too many innocent lives lost, too many families destroyed, and I realized that sometimes, in order to protect others, you have to fight. But you also have to know when to stop. You have to know when enough is enough. Scifi was silent for a moment, reflecting on his words. In her world, warriors were often seen as heroes or villains, depending on where they stood in the battle. But Jackson's words painted a different picture. He wasn't just a fighter, he was someone who understood the cost of war, someone who had fought not for glory but for something deeper. You said you joined the army, Scifi said slowly. But why did you leave? Jackson's expression grew more serious. I left because I realized I was becoming something I didn't want to be. I wasn't fighting for the right reasons anymore. I had seen too much destruction, too many lives lost, and I couldn't be part of that. So, I left. I went back to the land. But it wasn't the same. I couldn't forget what I'd seen, what I'd done. So I traveled, went from place to place. I needed to find peace with myself. Scifi felt a wave of understanding wash over her. Jackson wasn't just a warrior. He was a man searching for something greater than himself. He had fought, not for power or glory, but for the chance to do what was right. And when he had seen the cost of that, he had walked away. But what does this have to do with me? Scifi asked, her voice gentle. Jackson smiled faintly, a hint of sadness still in his eyes. I didn't think I was ready for this. For you. For this life. I thought I'd spent too much time fighting, too much time running from my past. But when I met you, Scifi, everything changed. I realized that maybe I wasn't supposed to run anymore. Maybe I was supposed to fight for something good. Scifi felt a deep emotion stir within her. Jackson had seen war. He had lived through unimaginable hardships, yet he still had the capacity to hope, to fight for something better, for peace. But you're not just a soldier, Scifi said, her voice full of admiration. You're a leader, a man who understands what it means to protect, to care for others. You're noble, Jackson, in a way that I never understood. Jackson looked at her, a hint of surprise in his eyes. Noble? He asked. I don't know if that's true. I'm just a man, trying to do the right thing. Scifi shook her head. No, you are noble. Not because of your title, not because of your bloodline, but because of who you are. You fought for what's right, even when it wasn't easy. You've given up so much, and you've never asked for anything in return. That is true nobility. Jackson was quiet for a moment, as if he were processing her words. He had never thought of himself as noble, but the way Scifi spoke of him, the way she saw him, made him rethink everything he had believed about himself. Thank you, he said softly. I don't think I've ever been seen like that before. It means more to me than you know. Scifi smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her. She had always been told that nobility was something you were born into, but now she understood that it was something you earned, through your actions and choices. Jackson's past had been filled with hardships, but it had shaped him into a man of honor and integrity. You don't need a crown or a title to be noble, Scifi said quietly. You already are. Jackson smiled back at her, his eyes full of gratitude. For the first time, Scifi felt a deep sense of peace. She had once feared her husband, worried that he was unpredictable, dangerous, and too different from her people. But now, she saw him for who he truly was. A man of strength, wisdom, and heart. He was not just a human. He was her equal. The sun had barely set, casting a warm golden light across the palace grounds when the news came. Scifi stood by the window, gazing out into the distance, lost in thought. Her mind had been occupied with Jackson and the revelations of his past, but something deeper was brewing, an unsettling feeling that she couldn't shake. The peace between the Zerkaa and the humans had been fragile, and Scifi had sensed a growing unrest among the leaders of her empire. It wasn't just about politics or diplomacy. There were whispers in the shadows of factions that didn't want peace between the two peoples. They wanted war. They wanted power. Jackson had always been calm and steady in the face of danger, but this was something different. This wasn't a battle for resources or territory. This was about something much larger, about the future of the galaxy itself. She turned as the door opened, and Jackson entered the room. His expression was serious, his eyes scanning the space before meeting hers. "What's happened?" Scifi asked, her voice tight with concern. "The rebels have moved," Jackson said, his voice low and urgent. "They've seized a nearby mining station, one that's crucial to both human and Zarka interests. They want to send a message, disrupt our peace, and threaten the Alliance." Seraph's heart sank. The Alliance was already fragile, and now it seemed that there were those who would stop at nothing to tear it apart. "I've spoken with the Council," Jackson continued. "They want me to lead the response. It's going to take everything we have to make sure this doesn't spiral out of control." Scifi nodded, her resolve hardening. She had always known that peace was difficult to maintain, but this was different. This wasn't just a political battle. It was a battle for the soul of the galaxy. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice steady. "We can't let them succeed. We have to protect our people and the future of this alliance." Jackson's eyes softened for a moment, but there was no hesitation in his reply. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Together they left the palace and made their way to the command center. The bustling halls were filled with soldiers, diplomats, and strategists, all working furiously to prepare for what was to come. Scifi felt the weight of their eyes on her as she walked by Jackson's side. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a leader, and she would fight for her people with everything she had. The two of them worked through the night, formulating a plan. The rebel forces were well armed and organized, but they had underestimated the unity between humans and the Zarka. Scifi knew that this wasn't just about fighting. This was about showing strength, about proving that their alliance was not something to be taken lightly. As dawn broke, Jackson stood beside Scifi in the command room, his eyes scanning the final battle plans. He had changed since the first time she had met him. Gone was the uncertain man who had hesitated to claim his place beside her. In his place stood a leader, a man who had found his purpose in this fight, and she was proud to stand by his side. "We move out in an hour," Jackson said. "We've got a narrow window to hit them before they can fortify their position. We take the station, or we risk everything." Scifi nodded. "Then we take it." The battle was long and brutal. The rebel forces fought fiercely, but they had underestimated the resolve of the combined human and Zarka forces. Jackson led the charge, his calm strategy and steady hand guiding their troops. Scifi fought beside him, her training and strength serving her well as she commanded the Royal Guard. Together, they pushed the rebels back inch by inch until they had reclaimed the station. By the time the fighting had stopped, the sun was high in the sky. Scifi stood on the balcony of the station looking out over the horizon. It was over, for now. Jackson joined her, his face bruised but triumphant. He had led them to victory, but it wasn't just his tactical genius that had won the day. It was his strength, his honor, and his unwavering belief in the cause. He had become the man Scifi had always known he was. More than just a warrior, more than just her husband. He had become the leader their people needed. "We did it," Scifi said, her voice soft but filled with pride. Jackson nodded, his expression serious but filled with a quiet satisfaction. "We did." Scifi turned to him, her gaze locking with his. "I was wrong about you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I feared you because I didn't understand you, but now I see you for who you truly are. Not just a man from Earth, but a true leader, a king in your own right." Jackson smiled faintly, but there was no arrogance in his expression. "I'm not a king, Scifi. I'm just a man who wants to make sure the people I care about are safe. That's all." Scifi reached out and placed a hand on his. "Then you're the kind of king I would follow. You've earned more than a crown. You've earned the respect of everyone around you." Jackson was quiet for a moment, his hand tightening around hers. "We've earned it together," he said, his voice steady. "This alliance, this peace, it's ours to protect. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure we never lose it." Scifi felt a sense of peace wash over her. Jackson had always been a man of action, someone who didn't need titles or recognition to do what was right. But in that moment, she realized that his nobility wasn't just in his actions, it was in his heart, in the way he led, in the way he cared for others. He wasn't just a soldier. He was the kind of leader the galaxy needed. Together, they would build a future where peace was more than just a dream. It would be a reality, one they would protect with everything they had. As the stars began to shine in the sky above, Serapha and Jackson stood together, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The galaxy was vast, and there would always be those who sought to tear it apart. But with their strength, their unity, and their shared commitment to the future, they knew they could overcome anything. And as long as they stood side by side, they would remain a force to be reckoned with, a true partnership forged in strength, honor, and love.